So welcome to PartnerUp, Partnerships Podcast. All right, we're live.
I'm excited to jump in. Get to work.
The thing that matters in a partnership is the trust and sacrifice.
Proposing, building software that works for you.
All right, we're back. If you didn't catch the last one with Jay McBain, Justin, wow, what that dude is something else. What'd you think of the last episode?
Yeah, there's levels to this game, right? There's levels, and he was a true maven. I don't know if there's anybody that thinks. I don't think if there's anybody that thinks about partnerships as much as that guy has thought about partnerships, and it definitely showed.
Definitely, the McBain household is a unique one, husband-wife power team. So, but I'm in a different format, so I probably sound different, and I also look different than the normal setup if you're watching on YouTube, because I'm in New Mexico, about to take off for first vacation since we had the baby. So, if you're seeing a different environment, that's just because I'm traveling. But we still are doing PartnerUp because we're hitting the consistent schedule the back half of this year.
We're dedicated. Yeah,
dedicated. And today's show, we have Isaac from Allocadia. How you doing, Isaac?
Oh, not too bad. Surviving the heat wave up here in Vancouver.
Yeah, what's up with that? It's like I was watching the. I paid attention to the Olympic trials and the runners. It was like they had to cancel because it was 110 in Portland.
Yeah, I saw that yesterday or on the weekend too. It's weird. Like I'm not used to this. Like Canada's generally a little bit cooler. Vancouver's not too bad, but being up 100, 110 is really weird for me. Like we don't have infrastructure. Like I have a little desk fan that's sitting off to the left of my laptop here, and it just not doing the trick.
I got to start an arbitrage opportunity, shipping AC units from Boston to Vancouver right now. I think that's how I make my quick buck. I'm sure they're flying on the shelf.
Put me first on your list. You can't get them here.
Yeah,
you're going to become one of those YouTube advertisers about drop shipping.
Yeah. Importer exporter is the title I prefer.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, I'm excited to hop into the topic today because I bet it's one that a lot of folks, if they've experienced the pain of going through this transition, and Isaac, some of what you've learned, A, there's no good role models for it, but B, any organization that's selling, in the mid-market plus, where you have to help your customers use your product, right? So I think enterprise software, or really anything where product-led growth, while fantastic, ain't going to do the trick, is kind of the intersect of professional services and partner. But I want to make sure that I shout out to the Cloud Software Association that the conference is back. So go check it out, cloudsoftwareassociation.com. I believe there is 1 week left on the early bird discount code. So go check it out. Come see us in person. I'm definitely going to be there. Justin's still on the fence, but I'm going to make him be there too. So he's going to come, and we're all going to get to see each other and hang out.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the crowd because, you get a bunch of people that network for a living, so to speak, partner for a living. Coming to a conference to talk about partnerships and network. And it's very meta, just like everything on this podcast. But I'm very eager to read the room and see if it is any different than your typical industry conference in that way.
It's going to be different. I think it's going to be a lot different because we actually are going to want to talk to one another. Go to a conference full of strict salespeople or strict marketers. It's like there's certain people I want to talk to, but partner people I generally want to network with most. So, Justin, kick us off with Isaac here. I think you had a great way of framing the topic of the day and starting the combo.
Yeah. So one thing that was really interesting that came up in our pre-podcast prep here with Isaac is we've seen partnerships organizations roll up in sales. We've seen them roll up to marketing, product. Isaac is unique in that he rolls up to the professional services and he's part of the professional services org. So Isaac, I'd love to hear and start the conversation with why, what led to that decision? Why often we see these as kind of, organizations that are sometimes contentious, sometimes friendly. Sometimes there's a lot of friction between the two. Why do you roll up to professional services in your partner org?
And I have to say one thing. The phrase is channel conflict, like literally emanates from Proserve versus channel, right? Like that, when you think about channel conflict, I think of those two departments. So how are you in the same department?
Yeah, it is kind of weird, and when I explain it to people, I kind of get about the same reaction because I'm not from professional services. Like it would make sense if I evolved into that role from doing this before, but like I have the same background as a lot of other people, kind of solution consulting, solution engineering, sales. About 12 months ago, it just kind of happened organically because we switched to, I wouldn't say switched, but we have this kind of three-legged stool approach where it's not just a technology partner, it's not just a services partner, it's where the two come together that we are really finding our sweet spot. And it ended up that I was talking more to the professional services teams and the leaders in those teams than I was to like the sales teams and the sales leaders. So it was basically just like having two bosses the entire time. So just coming into my QBRs at the end of, I think it was Q4, they kind of floated the idea like, would you be interested in doing this? And it's like I still have revenue targets, like all that's the same, but just because of the complexity of the deals we work in, and because we have partners involved from the onset of an opportunity all the way to closure, usually all the way through deployment and so on. It just made more sense that I sat in there, and it's actually been really great because I guess that's kind of what I saw as a next frontier that I couldn't figure out, but actually sitting in the middle of it, you kind of are able to take in a little bit more through osmosis about where there might be those gaps that you can fill and how there's a little bit more synergy than conflict. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And what were those conversations? Like you said, okay, you were in a different part and you started talking to Proserve and you started having a lot of conversations with their leaders, and over time you're like, I might as well be a part of this group. What were the nature of those conversations? Was it co-delivery? Was it outsourced services?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's kind of two sides to it. On the technology side, which was where we, up until relatively recently, did most of our partner business, it was just kind of the solution architecture. I mean, in sort of the upper enterprise where most of our partners play, or at least the deals that I was involved in were, every deal is configured differently. So the combined solution is looking different. So there isn't really a turnkey kind of out of the box pitch that we can give. So everyone is figuring out what can we do, how would it work, what has to connect to what. Does it start with you? Does it start with us? So I was working with that team, kind of our integrations team, trying to figure out what we could report back to them. And then as we've sort of evolved into being more consulting services oriented kind of partner program, well, obviously they're deploying parts of that cycle. So they're kind of involved up front in saying what they can do. Then we have to figure out scoping. Then we have to bring in, maybe they're an expert on a third party technology that we've got to work with. So I'm kind of, for the first part, it was me just playing admin assistant, just setting meetings and knowing who the right people in the room were. And then kind of as we got further along, we established a little bit more of a process. But those were sort of the driving factor into me moving into PS.
Gotcha. Interesting. So it was kind of a just natural need from the customer to have both the capacities of what the partners are providing, which might have been outside the scope of your professional services, and the know-how on Allocadia from the professional services org. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, like we're a very customer centric kind of focus in both our sales cycle and with our customers. So, and I know a lot of people say that, but
Right.
well, nobody says they're not a customer centric organization.
They're not in
But
business, right?
yeah. Yeah. But for us, it was a lot about, okay, we know the problem. How do we solve it? And, it's not on the account admin or the AE trying to figure out how to solve it. It's the professional services team figuring out, can we deliver this? Can we deliver it well? Who else do we need in the room to be able to? And so a lot of that kind of triangulation, just as the market's evolving, as there's new technologies out there, as there's new things that people are wanting. And then obviously COVID sprinkled a whole another level of confusion and change and interesting dynamic to all of that when we can no longer go on site, we can no longer meet people direct. The types of marketing people are doing is pretty dramatically pivoted. So yeah, I don't know. It was a perfect storm, I guess.
Tell me a little bit about the origination of both of these kind of functions, right? So professional services, when did it enter the purview of Allocadia? When was it that someone said, we need to have an internal mastery of our own implementation and kind of management of our, of our technology? Was that from day one, or was that something that happened later on?
That's a great question. The distinction of role probably happened a little bit later. Like I was employee, I don't know, 80 or 90. That's four 4 years ago next week, and we're 10, 12 years old. So I think we always had some level of that function, but I mean, we started out with two twin sisters in their garage. So there wasn't a designated function at that time. I think it probably came out when we got to the 10, 15 level, where there's a little bit of a blurred line between solution engineering and professional services. It was certainly well established when I started 4 years ago. At that time, we did pretty much exclusively all our own deployments. I mean, there might have been a little one-off case here or there, and I know there were with some of the partners we still have and are significantly more active now. But for the most part, we, as of 4 or 5 years ago when I joined, we were doing it all ourselves.
So help me understand how you think these separate functions align, and this could be your opinion or anecdote from Allocadia, is if I think about professional services organizations, I'm driving some North Star metric typically aligned around customer health, right? So that can be using product analytics, it can be using a bunch of leading or lagging indicators. And when I think about partner services, internally at Drift, we actually just opened up our first role. It's called Partner Delivery Consultant. So if anyone's interested, come check it out, apply.drift.com/careers. I can advertise those things, right, Justin? Do we have any corporate sponsors?
No.
No. Okay, so we can do that. We can do
Free
self-service.
pod, free cash.
So we're hiring our first one, which, because I've been thinking about all this stuff you're talking about, Isaac, it's like, who is responsible for ensuring our partners know the best practices and those indicators of customer health? And then when you realize it's not really the CSM, it's not the channel account manager that's more responsible for sales, there needs to be something inside of professional services. So we're calling it partner delivery. And we're trying to align towards customer health as that function's primary role. Is that how you see it? Is that how the partnership with Proserve and what you're doing kind of, it's like, this is why this is so important, is we have the internal knowledge in Proserve, and our goal is to make sure our partners have that same knowledge.
It's a good question, and we've kind of gone a few different ways. And to be perfectly honest, like, we've had a few false starts. I feel totally fine saying that because they were my ideas that didn't work. So I'll apologize in front of the world. But,
we'll have to, now you're gonna have to tell us about those so other people don't make them later. We'll follow up with those.
Well, I mean, it kind of comes out here. We started, I think we went way too far one direction, like in terms of making sure that they knew absolutely everything under the sun. And early on, when partners are coming in that are going to be doing deployments, they're all telling you, well, we're the best partner out there. We're going to do so many of these. We're going to bring you so much business. So we invest so much time, resources, and training into making sure they're certified, making sure they can do every weird one-off scenario. And then, we invest, God, I don't want to think how much, 40, 50 hours into training somebody and then never see them again. The amount of time that we spent doing this was almost crippling to that program because it turned, like, the impression of it was such a wasted effort. And so then we kind of tried to go the other way and said, well, we're just going to bring them in for some shadowing, just make sure they're under NDA and they can kind of get a feel for it. And then we have a project on the horizon. We're not going to train them until then. But they didn't have the exposure to really be able to recognize or add value at that point. And then we still didn't get any value out of them. So I guess those are kind of the two false start directions. Now we kind of, as weird as it sounds, we've kind of gone a reverse direction to what we've been doing before. So they're actually, new partners won't come in at the front of our sales cycle. They'll come in usually more with customers where the platform's already configured and the change is relatively minor. And so they're doing more consulting. We're kind of making additional work, not necessarily just splitting up the deployment or having them do the deployment. And then as they get more comfortable there, they work towards the front of the sales cycle. And that was sort of the epiphany that we had, is it's a lot easier to get them exposure and do the things that they're experts in without having to purely rely on them configuring the platform correctly. Because, like, anywhere in enterprise SaaS can be configured so many different ways. And if somebody does, like, sometimes customers don't have the best ideas. So if you don't recognize that maybe that's not a best practice, even though it's possible, there's little things like that that are incredibly nuanced, but incredibly difficult to call out in advance. That's sort of how we've ensured that quality. And we obviously have all the other QA methods in place and check-ins and all that fun stuff. But that was sort of the paradigm shift that we use to address that?
It's I think whenever I had my agency, Justin, you might have seen something when you were in your agency life. I often said, you know, my clients would be a lot more successful if it weren't for my clients. Like you have these ideas, or the only thing standing in the way of my client's success is my client, because of these preconceived notions of what the outcome's supposed to be, and that's often the nuance of a partner team versus an internal professional services team, because I'm assuming that let me make this assumption. You correct me if I'm wrong. Did you have a specific vertical that you originally had most of your traction in? Like most of your customers fell into X vertical, like other technology companies
Yep.
or financial
Yep.
services?
So yeah, I mean, B2B tech was our sweet spot, and it still is to a large degree. I don't know how much of that is that it's an industry fit and how much of that is that just they as a whole tend to be a little bit more open to new technologies. They tend to be early adopters of a lot of things, and they're, less inclined to say, we want the big box suite, we're going to look for best of breed. That just seems to be more of their kind of mentality.
And then
So I
as
guess,
you start to look outside that lens of like, so you're a B2B tech company, you're servicing B2B tech companies, there's not that much disconnect between services and servicing your customer. And then as you work with some of these larger customers and larger partners, right, your expertise starts to break down, where the client might have different ideas for your platform that you might not have the best point of view, the client might not have the best point of view, and you kind of need someone there to help bridge the gap between the two. Like, hey, we've helped Allocadia and these other accounts, but we also have a functional expertise in financial services. Have you started to look at this relationship that you have with the professional services organization under the lens of like new market development? Because the services required for B2B tech probably a little bit different, those best practices, right? So they don't go down the wrong path, so they don't have the wrong idea. A little bit different in the next vertical over. Have you started to see any of that
so
vertical
we,
kind of specific services?
oh, so yeah, there is. I mean, we're still like, our ICP has changed relatively dramatically in the last 4 years. It's actually kind of interesting seeing that. So yeah, we definitely have partners that are experts in areas that we're not as familiar, and that's kind of one of the catalysts to bringing them in. I mean, there's also partners that are expert in just technologies that we may not be, or just even things that you don't want your technology vendor addressing. Like, we can help give you best practices on, like, let's say process design or change management, but really that should probably come to somebody externally. And I guess that was kind of one of the other things that we flipped, is we were trying to bring in expertise from a partner. And one of the things that makes it really hard when you have a good professional services team, there's not a lot they're not experts on. So it's not like a partner's going to do an integration better than our professional services team. So, but there are areas that we don't have as much experience in. And so that's kind of more about, and this is where it's almost turned into more consulting than it has like just pure deployment. The deployment's now almost a byproduct, because they, like, if you think of all the work around a deployment, rather than kind of cut up that pie, it's about making a bigger pie. So there's now all this additional layer of consulting that you can wrap around it. So we're not necessarily doing less. It's just what we're doing is different. It's very focused on configuration, and we're bringing the experts in to focus on the areas that we wouldn't have the experience in.
So you mentioned a bigger pie. I'm curious, and this is more of a tactical question that we might not need to spend much time on, but I think to help paint the picture for the audience, is that in a lot of situations, especially when you have direct account executives selling into accounts, they're thinking either or, right? Partner or Proserve. Is that always a consideration, or do you have projects that are co-delivered?
We have projects that are co-delivered. Like, in an ideal scenario, and these, by no means is every deal, but they're coming up more and more, is we will have our professional services team scope it, and then the partner will do whatever element helps them complete their project. Like, we'll kind of give them the option. If they want to do the deployment, great. More often than not, it's just easier for simplicity of the deal for us to do it. But if they're wrapping 4 or 5x their license cost around it in consulting, they don't really care about our services, which are like 25%. Especially like if you look at the big GSIs, like, they have no interest whatsoever in our services. It's the consulting they can wrap around it.
Hmm.
So we do get them involved out of the gate, and they might do some of the integration work, but it's rare that they will do a start to finish deployment. It happens, but it's not usually their sweet spot.
I have another quick question. You said 4 to 5x license costs, which that in and of itself is typically going to be, that'll make some head of sales, client delivery director that owns a number kind of turn their head and go, okay, it's a, modern software company where the services dollars are meaningful, right? You're able to quantify that. How did you go about quantifying that dollar amount with partners? Was this based on hours? How are you helping partners, let's say, scope their engagement? What does that process kind of look like to say, okay, partner X, you think we need to work together. There's some value hypothesis that they have that Allocadia might be a fit for their clients, or they have a mutual customer that they feel like they need help. No traction really happens until they have something they can sell, right? Like the partner needs to be able to sell something that isn't your software. Your margin doesn't make them any money. So they arrive at some price. Are you giving them templates? Are they asking you for hours? How are you getting from partner interest to, okay, I can charge $500K, $1 million for this engagement? Help us understand how you get from like new partner to I can go sell this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I wish it was a perfect silver bullet that I could give you. It's been a process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and it sort of depends to a degree where they are. Like I said before, kind of our epiphany was starting the partners further back in the customer. I typically say life cycle. I'm not supposed to say life cycle because it implies an end. The cradle to heaven process.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, they start that. It's more of a defined problem because we've had time to recognize this is what you need to do. And then the partner can kind of, based on what they've done before, they can scope out their own hours because they have a really good problem definition. It becomes a lot more broad the further forward you get in the sales process. And it's a little bit more difficult to bring up before they've closed a deal. Hey, you should spend a whole lot more money on professional services. So that becomes a little bit more challenging. But so sort of what we've done, and Justin, I talked to you about it the other day, was this swim lane model where we've mapped out, I think it's 140 different individual steps from like BDR sends them an email all the way through like they expand to our top platform. Every marketer has us and they've renewed for the 10th time. And we looked for those discrepancies between what we are doing now and probably shouldn't do or don't want to be doing, and the ones we do. And we kind of found these little clusters. And then we tried to assign basically a skew to them to say, here's roughly what needs to be done. And there's, I think we're hoping to get to 15 or so, but we have, I think we're just sitting at 4 or 5 right now. And, here's a rough cluster of what we want to do. And so then we can say, here's the background. They have the conversation with the customer and they have a reasonably good idea about the amount of hours, the amount of additional resources they're going to be able to bring in. And they can scope it usually off an hour call based on the context that we give them.
Gotcha. So you've almost templated like the maturity model of not knowing anything about Allocadia to being fully enabled, top tier with the platform, and kind of put some estimates of like hours behind what each piece would entail with a typical customer.
Yeah, like there's only so far down the standardization road that you can go. I don't know if we've ever like said, we're expecting this is going to be 4,000 hours.
Yep.
But we can relatively well say like this is what they need, or I guess even to the point if we're looking at like a managed services or a temporary kind of person role, then we can say this is going to be probably about an FTE, or this is going to be a half FTE, or this is going to be 2 FTEs. We can give them enough context that they can come in, and we don't like to play middleman too much, so we can enough that we can say this is a ballpark. You should talk to them. Here's what we need to figure out to narrow it down, and then they can provide a kind of a quote after that. So we don't have like a hard, fill in the lines in this template, but we have a kind of a standardized offering. I call them SKUs, which is probably not the right terminology for them, but offering is probably better. And that seems to have been like, even that's something that's kind of evolved even in the last couple of quarters, and it's been super useful. It's actually gone better than I was expecting. Absolutely not me that should take credit for all that. There's a ton of people at Allocadia and at our partners involved, but it's been super psyched to see how well it's been going.
Right. It's team effort. And have you agreed, like work with your Proserve org to agree on like all right, out of all these swim lanes and things that could a customer may need to get to this ultimate state of maturity, these are the ones that, Proserve is going to be able to deliver on. These are the ones that partners, we're going to rely on partners for. Is it VAT defined, or is it kind of case by case basis, account by account, relationship by relationship?
A bit of both. Like this model has largely come off. I mean, again, I report into professional services. I have access to all these people,
Yeah, right.
talk to them on a daily basis. So they've largely fueled this model as to like, what do you guys really like doing? What do you find very inconvenient, or what is it that you don't want to do, or wish we could take off your plates? And so there's not really a lot of those things are the things they wanted people to do anyway. So it's just I can try to find partners to do those, and those are becoming more standard that we are not doing them. The hard part is the things that we can do, but maybe we shouldn't. We've just in that cadence of customer asks, we do because that's what we need to facilitate the deployment. So it's not turnkey yet, but it's moving that direction. And I mean, I don't think it'll ever get all the way there. I'm lucky our partner or our professional service team has been pretty open to working with partners, and they're not super coin operated. We're small enough that we still don't have people fighting for every single billable hour. Like, people don't mind helping for things that are a little bit outside their purview. They don't mind helping a partner figure out something that maybe they haven't seen before. So that's made it a little bit easier in transition, but we're still transitioning to that direction. We probably will be for another 10 years.
Is that final kind of scope done by the time they're signing a subscription with you? Meaning, your deal sizes range from what? Are you 250K plus, 100K plus, 50K plus?
Yeah, we're probably. I mean, our sweet spot is about 500 million and up in terms of revenue. So we're probably, our lower mid market, we're probably 50 to 100K. Our larger clients are into the seven figures.
Okay. So during that process of evaluating, there's the license cost, and then there is the, okay, get this thing live, make it all work, kind of total cost of ownership. Is it completely scoped out what the services are going to be in total before that customer is signing with you? Or are there, oftentimes unknowns around that? And the reason why I'm asking that question, the question behind the question is, a lot of times account executives that haven't worked in the channel in these agency relationships will be very hesitant to go deeper with external parties when that pricing structure they can't control, right? So if you bring them in early, their control of price on that deal kind of exits the picture a little bit. Do you have services always scoped before you sign the customer, or sometimes it's a little bit before, after, in between, middle?
Great question. 99%, I would say yes, with the caveat that a lot of times it's like they're talking to a partner now, it's knowing that they are going to do something like a year down the road. So they kind of just want to know what the roadmap is. So sometimes that is a little bit more ambiguous in terms of what's priced out, or even if they're just doing, like, they're paying a consultant to do the technology road mapping, then that may not be finalized. But in terms of the, like, having Allocadia actually configured, that would be the overwhelming majority of the time that is set in stone going in before anything's signed.
Right. And the key, you said, is to bring them earlier into the cycle versus, I feel like a lot of times it comes in, the standard Salesforce stages, solution plan, solution validation, right? Like, we're not talking about what it means to actually get this technology into your hands and utilized in your business until the end of the sales cycle, which, if we're talking about additional costs then, or effort or energy, I like the concept of inverting that, right? Like, starting the sales cycle with the what's needed for the actual lift. In fact, that's another thing that we're starting to do here is we're starting to call it business value consulting, where we're leading with that engagement, right, versus leading with the software sale in a lot of those situations. And it kind of feels somewhat similar to what you're doing. You mentioned that the services are less about implementation and they're much more about consulting, right? And at the beginning of the process, the more consultative you're going to be, the more information you have to sell later on. right? Like I feel like your account executives, you go through this really in-depth scoping process in the beginning where you identify services, kind of scope and strategy. How much more information do you have to close that deal at the end? Probably a lot more, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it was, I mean, the hardest thing, and I'm sure it's the same with anybody else, is getting that first one. Like my background is sales. I would not want a partner who had never been in a sales cycle to have his first one with me. That would be terrifying. So and that's kind of why our whole reverse of getting them involved in with our existing customers first, and then kind of progressing back and having more and more, less experience in where they're experts and gaining more of that Allocadia experience. By the time they're ever dealing in a net new deal, like they've got significant experience, they can actually add significant value, and they can ask questions that either maybe our sales team wouldn't ask, or just they're not in a position to really be comfortable asking. So they add quite a bit of value there.
I want to double
Go
click
ahead.
into that process really quick, to use a cliche term. We've gone back and forth talking about like what's the best way to enable our channel partners, and I'm curious, when you're starting on the back end of the cycle, are you usually starting with one individual at that partner who's going to be the like Allocadia subject matter expert, and then from there you balloon it out to maybe a broader team, or do you start with a team wide enablement and then work down it? What does that process look like of taking a partner who's never done anything in your platform before, and the maturity model of activating them and enabling them?
Yeah, I would say the overwhelming majority of the time, it's kind of, as you said, it's the former of it's one person who's really interested and gets it. Maybe they don't know the platform, but they get the value, and they can see how that would be applied to other things. And then, and we've just kind of done that now. We've rolled our first partner that has a full dedicated Allocadia practice, and that was how it started. Was one person who was just really an expert, and they kind of trained the team around them. We've definitely tried the shotgun approach, and let's get as many people enabled as quickly as possible. It just didn't really land. I mean, we might have got some good fortune referrals out of it over the years, so it wasn't a complete fool's errand. But in terms of getting like a deep ingrained strategic partnership, we kind of really need that one person to champion it.
Is that the primary forcing function? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
that champion, is that the primary forcing function, or are there other forcing functions outside of that? You said the shotgun approach doesn't necessarily work. Having a champion that's all in, that you're kind of using as your indicator to go all in on that partner, right? As someone bought in, kind of going above and beyond. Are there other forcing functions that you see in the partner lifecycle where joint account, or what other indicators do you see to go, okay, this is worth investing in trying to develop a practice or functional expertise?
Yeah, the joint accounts would be the kind of the next biggest one, although we tend to look at that more from a lens of like technology partners. Like if we have our kind of key technology partners up here, we've got this little incubator of other companies that we're friendly with, we talk to, we may have a couple integrations. We're not sinking all the time and the resources of kind of doing a massive 5-year co-marketing plan, but we're kind of building those up, and those are sort of where we see the next line of partners to come along, and then we kind of look at, well, where are their SI or their consulting partners, what do they look like, and that's kind of the next incubator level of those technology partnerships. Or as happening a lot of times, which is even better for us, is well, we can introduce people at those technologies into our existing services partners. And great, we have turned a 3-legged stool into a 4. That expression's probably not going to catch on, but you get the gist.
Can't say
we've run across some of that.
And how, I mean, you've got a number over your head. How do you parse out the enablement piece and devoting your time there to driving sales? Are you seeing that starting them at the back end of the process actually like opens on a lot more sales later on?
Yeah,
you got to put on the upfront costs. Like, how do you balance those two motives?
Yeah, it does. And like anything else in partnerships, it is an extremely slow process. Like you're probably looking at a year plus in order to start seeing, for your tree to bear fruit. I'm lucky in that the way I'm measured, like I'm my own worst critic. So I measure all my revenue numbers, but they're more of a kind of measure of program success or kind of a measure of program direction than they are like that I'm chasing them and I have somebody breathing down my neck about them, which makes me a bit lucky in that regard because I can focus on what I think is going to be the best for the business. Like last quarter, I was way more heavily involved with our existing customers than I normally would be, just due to situation and just a weird time because our customers, what they're doing is changing. They needed help. We needed to bring in partners. So I wasn't doing as much biz dev as I normally would be in a quarter. And that's okay. I'm sure my numbers this quarter will be a little bit down because of it, but the additional value we drove for our customers well offsets that. And I know there's a reason why those numbers will be down. And then quarter after that, they'll be back up again. So I can focus more on biz dev coming into Q3.
What's next, Isaac? What's the next big milestone? So you're in Proserve, you're building this foundation, and I feel like this is always the question that there's many chasms that are to be crossed in partner land, and I think you've probably arrived at that first step where you have your first global SIs and big organizations that have developed practices right inside of their business. I mean, that's a giant milestone because making any of these big agencies or SIs build a practice inside of their org, that's a tall challenge. How are you thinking about planning for the future that you haven't seen yet, right? Like what other role models are you looking to? How are you kind of learning where this next phase is for building out best in class services and taking your company to the next phase?
That's a great question, and I really wish I had an answer for you. We are, I don't know, we're coming at it at a bit of a different approach. We've acted way too much in a silo in the past, and again, I don't mind calling out my own wrong decisions. So a lot of the success has come from when we stopped operating in a silo and we let the rest of the business sort of dictate where we're going. We let product say the types of partnerships that would be beneficial to where the product's going. We've let our professional services teams guide us in the parts of our PS org that aren't the most lucrative. We let our sales team or our solution engineering team say, well, this is what we bump into in deals. So I'm not exactly sure where it's going to go. I wish I could say that I had a master plan, but it's kind of to a large degree, letting the organization and the direction of the market and the whole company kind of guide the partnerships. I mean, they're sort of all our customers as a partner team. So they're the ones that are, the same way a company can have product-led growth. I guess our partner team's doing the same thing with letting our internal customers guide us.
That is a very interesting answer to that question because you've probably unknowingly you might have kind of solved a problem that a lot of people listening today are experiencing right now, which is lack of organizational buy-in cross-functionally into partner programs, right? Especially partner programs that come in later stage. So what's that Ben Franklin quote? I don't remember the whole thing, but I think the last line is "Involve me and I'll understand." Right? That's kind of the takeaway here, right? Is that they're involved in helping shape the future of where partners are going, which means there's more context, more understanding, and more working into the roadmaps and the plans. One thing that came to mind, which we need to go have this person on too, Justin, was I'll give Sean Lane from Drift, one of our hypergrowth podcasts. He has operations. He interviewed the head of Proserve at Acquia. I don't know if you caught that one, but it's a great episode where she talks about how Proserve and partner services have gotten integrated, and Acquia, being a $350 million revenue company, probably a good role model to go look out for. And you've given me a good reminder to have her on as a follow-on. But it'll be interesting to see what emerges from that. I bet there's going to be a whole bunch more creativity about how partners evolve at Allocadia. When you have all of those functional leaders, looking at building the future versus, a silo. I mean, Justin, how much can master planning can you and I do without having Leo or Trisha or Todd or DC involved? I mean, there's not much, right?
Right. I think it's a great calling if you're in an organization that has or is starting a professional services org, start the dialogue early and often, because it only gets 10 times harder every 2 quarters, year you wait. And they're going to be thinking about their own 5-year plans and their own prerogatives and how do they, they're going to be focused on making customers successful, just like you're trying to do with your partners. And many people are if they're not thinking about partners, they're going to go and try and build it all themselves naturally, right? Because They don't want to be bad. They don't want their customers to be unsuccessful. So if you're out there and you see this happening in your organization, I think we can all agree that the better you start the dialogue and the framework and the swim lanes, the better the easier your job's going to be long term.
Without a shadow of doubt. Involve me and I'll understand. That's the takeaway, Isaac. Kudos to you for getting the rest of the organization on board, and we can't wait to check in with you the next time, the next big milestone, to see what has been created inside of Allocadia. Before we bounce, have to remind everyone again, Cloud Software Association, come join the Slack channel. That's where we can have follow-on conversations. Isaac, you had a fantastic blog post in Crossbeam, so I'll give them another unsponsored shout out. I think it's a fill in the blanks exercise for evaluating your partner program, which we'll link in the show notes. I would actually Slack that to my team. I was like, hey, we should use this as a matrix on some of these partner relationships. So some good follow-on material from the call today, straight from the front lines with Isaac. And then last CTA, we've got a couple new reviews on Apple Podcasts, Justin. So
there we go.
Keep those coming in.
5 stars, right?
5 stars. We are a 5-star only podcast. The only 5-star only podcast in partnerships.
There we go.
There's 3 of us. There's actually Jay McBain had 100. I did not even catch 100. There's like 3 real ones. But leave us a review, sub on YouTube, give us a like, comment, and we'll see you folks next time. Isaac, it was a blast.
Thanks, Isaac.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.